Okay, so today I'm in Newmarket with Steve Smith Eccles. Thanks very much for agreeing to talk to us today, Steve.
My pleasure.
Now you were proudly sort of known as the last of the Cavaliers, the jockeys that used to enjoy themselves as much as they work hard, play hard. Was it really that much fun back in the day?
It was, well, I think jockeys of that era that I rode in certainly enjoyed themselves far more than, say, jockeys of today. Because obviously the rules and tests and so on and so forth weren't quite as stringent. If they ever did test you.
Okay, so you didn't come from a traditional, what you call traditional racing background. You were brought up in a mining village in Derbyshire. So how did your sort of love of racing ignite?
Well, I suppose you must call me a little bit of an oddball. As you say, born and bred in a mining village in Derbyshire, born in 1955. There were tough times for the family, but as a kid I never ever remember being under pressure or I had a wonderful childhood, and when I think back, having chatted to my dad and saw what sort of lifestyle he had to go through, because in those days, if you were in a mining village, everybody went down the pit. Okay, so when Dad was 14 years of age, on his birthday, he got sent down the pit. There's no if, buts and whatever. And he went down there with his cousins and his brothers and his father. My granddad used to work down there as well. That was it. Where I was given a chance, right, not to go down. In actual fact, when I was 12 years of age, my father took me down the shaft, just go to the pit bottom, nowhere near the coal face where they were working and whatever, and just going down in that, they called it the cage, and it was literally a cage, and it went down a million miles an hour. Just by going down there, just looking around, and then coming back up, it had the desired effect that my father wanted. It frightened the life out of me. So I thought, well, I've got half a chance here. Because Dad's giving me a chance. He was sent down. He was never going to send me down. And luckily, I passed my 11 plus, and I was grammar school educated. And even through my sort of schooling days, I was never really content with thinking about what am I going to do, or whatever, or what to do rather. And I used to walk by Dad on Saturday afternoon, and he was on the sofa watching the TV, watching racing. And I used to look at Dad watching racing, and I'd say to him, I'm going to be a jockey when I grow up, Dad, and carry on walking. Never sat there and watched racing or anything like that. So it's quite extraordinary. And through my grammar school sort of education, the careers officers used to say, what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm going to be a jockey. Well, they were totally flummoxed, obviously. And they said, yeah, go on, you carry on. And my mother wrote off to 3 trainers. And I don't know how to this day she picked the trainers. One was Frenchy Nicholson, David Nicholson's father. She wrote off saying, my son would like to be a jockey, he'd like to come and serve his apprenticeship, blah, blah, blah. Frenchy Nicholson said, because I weighed about 7'7" in those days, he said, no, I don't take anybody over 6 stone, so I didn't go there. The second choice was Arthur Stevenson. Uncle Arthur up north, massive trainer in those days, because I was always going to be a jump jockey through my weight, and he didn't really want apprentices. He wanted paid lads, ordinary lads, experienced lads. And the third choice was Harry Thompson-Jones in Newmarket. How she come up with that name, I'll never know. Anyway, he said he'd take me on a month's trial. So on July 28th, 1970, my father and my uncle Ian, Dad's brother, they took me down to Newmarket. And that was the first time I ever saw a racehorse.
Now that must have been quite terrifying for a 15-year-old from a small village.
Yeah, because the only thing I'd ever sat on prior to that was a donkey on Skegness Beach and the odd pit pony when they used to come up for the summer holidays. And that was riding them bareback without reins. So yeah, it did come as quite a shock. But for whatever reason, and I don't know why, I just took to it like a duck to water. I mean, the first week there we didn't do anything because I was part of a group of 4, and the other 3 guys, they'd had sort of pony club sort of background and whatever. But the first week all we did was polish sort of head collars for the horses. We used to muck out feed the pigs and do a bit of mucking out of the boxes when the horses had gone out of exercise. And the first time I ever sat on a racehorse was on an old act called what's he called? Oh, Jesus Christ. Anyway, that shows you how long ago it was. And all we did was trot around a sand ring. And I got on him, and he set off trotting, and I couldn't rise to the trot. I couldn't go in rhythm. So I was bouncing all over the bloody place. And I must admit that week was one of the toughest weeks of my life. And my backside was sore as anything after that week. But eventually the penny dropped. And from that to going out on the heath and then riding gallops took about 3 months.
So stories from those days of people I've spoken to in the past have said that there was a lot of sort of, not bullying, but there's a lot of practical jokes played, and the young lads would get a fair bit of grief.
Yeah. I mean, like any male sort of institution, you get put through the mill. It's like a passage of, what's the word I'm looking for?
Rite of passage.
Rite of passage. That's it. Yeah. And if you couldn't take it, you'd be out on your backside straight away. I mean, that was it. I mean, the things they used to do. I mean, they used to grease you. That horses get their hooves greased every night, right? It's good for the hooves, and it makes them shine, because every night we used to have to show our horses. We used to brush them over for 20 minutes, strap them. And the governor used to come round, and you'd be there. You'd be smart and whatever. And obviously, they grease the feet. Now, when they used to grease us, they used to whip your jobbers down, grease your privates, and hang you up in a hay bag from the rafters of the tack room. That's what's called being greased. So that happened a couple of times, but it happened to everybody. So it was no big deal. It was part of the rite of the passage and whatever. And I was from a Derbyshire mining family, and yeah, we were pretty tough in them days. But I can't imagine that happening now.
And
with all this
Newmarket
political correctness shit.
So Newmarket town was a bit of an eye opener as well.
Very much so, yeah. I mean, Newmarket is just. I mean, you got the town, the high street, and then surrounding the high street is all these stables, and then since 1970 they've spread out further into the countryside and whatever. It's just it's a massive industry. It is the industry. And yeah, I mean, they used to have an old building in the high street called the Carlton Hotel, and it's where Boots and W.H. Smith stands now. Those two buildings was the Carlton. And it was a fantastic old building. And I remember walking in there, I'm only, 15, 16. And the one thing that struck me was the bar. The bar was nearly half a furlong long. And it was topped with marble and whatever. And it's just like going back to the Victorian times. Fantastic. Why they ever knocked it down and built bloody Boots and W.H. Smith, I'll never know. But yeah. And the thing was, you could walk into a pub and get a drink because you were small, but everybody else was small, and they never used to bother. They never asked you your age or anything like that. Dear me, I remember getting asked my age when I was about 30 in some places.
So when you obviously you always wanted to be a jump jockey. So when you started to get put up on a few horses, how long was it after from that day you walked in with your pinstripe suit on?
Now, the reason I went to Tom Jones was because he was a deal trader. He trained flat horses, not many, but mainly jumpers. And I was hoping to get a few rides on the flat to go on to be a jump jockey. Because when I was a young kid, I used to help deliver 100-weight sacks of coal when I was about 14. That last year I was at school, and I prematurely sort of muscled up. So I was never going to be a flat jockey, but hoping to get a few rides on the flat. But I've been in Tom Jones's yard about a year and a bit, and the other guys that was with me, 2 of them fell by the wayside. One went on to have a ride in front of me. Then I rode a horse on the flat, and that was at Yarmouth. I think it was not. I was about 17, so it must have been my second season there. And I rode this 3-year-old filly called Fine Leg in a mile flat race, a straight mile flat race at Great Yarmouth. And it was a barrier start, and I think there was about 12, 13, 14 runners, something like that. And as you can imagine, it's almost shocking, really, when I think back, because you don't know what's going to happen. And although I'd ridden quite a lot of gallops in those days, gallops do not compare to actual race speed. You never go as quick as you do on a gallop for as long as you do on a gallop than you would do in a race. So in a mile, it was just like that, just like a blink of an eye. And jumped out the gates, and I beat one home. And who rode the one home? The one I beat? Lester Piggott. Made my day, that did. So that, and I only had one ride on the flat that year, because I had to lose about £8 to ride that, because I was just getting bigger and bigger. And the following year, that's when I started riding jumping. So I started riding jumping in 73, 74 season.
Okay, there was obviously a lot less racing back in those days, so it must have been a lot more difficult to get spare rides or get put up, even, you know, as an inexperienced jockey.
Yeah, I mean, that year I had 3 rides, all 3 non-opers, but, you know, he got me on a racetrack. And then Tom Jones, I don't know what he saw, then he started to give me a ride. The other guys he had no other claiming jockeys there at the time then. He then gave me a ride on, what was it? I'd had 3 rides, and his first ride was a horse called Ballysilly. And I rode in there once, and then he was my first winner. And that was at Market Raisin, a 3-mile novice hurdle. Beat the odds-on favourite, ridden by Colin Tinkler. Ballysilly, and that was about 1974.
Okay, now you won. Fast forwarding, you won on Tingle Creek. Everybody thinks of the Tingle Creek now, but you won on Tingle Creek at Sandown in 1977, and with 51 winners, you're in the top 10 jockeys. How difficult was it to make a living in those days? You know, with such less sort of racing.
I can't. When you say how was it? So was
a lot
it,
less
so,
opportunities.
No, they weren't. They weren't. But that's the way it was in those days. You know, you didn't think, oh well, that jockey's doing better than me because he's doing something different, or something's different in his sort of yard or whatever. That was the way it was. You rode your horses for your trainer. Okay. Once you started to get on with your trainer, riding winners and whatever, then you might start picking up outside rides. Okay, but you was like I was apprenticed to Harry Thompson Jones for 5 years. Okay, so I couldn't do anything. I couldn't go and say, oh, I'm off to ride for this fellow, or ride that horse, or whatever. He was my governor, and I was beholden to him. So without Tom Jones backing, I wouldn't be here. But luckily, he saw something in me, and he gave me the opportunity. And the horses that he gave me to ride, I gave him back his faith, because I rode him the winners. And if I'm honest, to ride a horse like Tingle Creek, and I was only 20 odd, 21, something like that. He was a very good horse. I think he held about 2 track records at the time. Then all of a sudden, I'm 21 years of age. I get put on him, and I never sat on him before. Normally, when you ride horses at for a yard, you'd ride them schooling or whatever. In actual fact, I tell a lie. I did ride him. I rode him one Sunday morning when Tom used to send his horses for a walk down the Snellwell Road. So I walked 2 miles down the Snellwell Road and back on Tingle Creek. That's the only time I've sat on him. Seen him race a million times, obviously. And I've watched the race on TV, and I try and think what I felt like riding him, but yeah, I can't. It was just, I don't know. It's amazing, and the beauty of Tingle Creek is he never used to jump a fence like a fence. He used to hurdle fences. Okay, so rather than go up and down like that, he'd go like that, and consequently he'd take off 10 yards this side and he'd land another 15 yards the other side, and that was his forte, his jumping. I didn't ride him too many times, maybe 6, 7, 8, something like that. He never made a mistake. Incredible, never made a mistake. But in those days, they didn't used to water the tracks as much, and that Tingle Creek Trophy that they call the race now, that was the Sandown Pattern Chase, and that was a month before when the ground was really firm. He would not win a race on soft ground. No matter, you put him against donkeys, he would not win a race on soft ground. But on rock hard ground or firm ground, he used to love it. And I used to sit, steer, and go with him.